Right, so my name is Jez Cope. I'm the Research Data Manager for the University of Sheffield. I'm based in the University Library. And this is my colleague Angus Taggart, who is the Library Systems Manager with a focus on research. For the next 20 minutes or so, we shall tell you a little bit about the work we've been doing with Figshare and with Ex Libris to integrate these two products. So, research data. We've just heard research data. It's a big thing in this area right now. What is it? What are we talking about? It's quite general in a sense. We're looking at the evidence gathered by researchers, analysed by researchers to produce research conclusions. So we're not talking about financial data, we're not talking about kind of grants, project management stuff, not talking about student data. It's specifically the stuff that is the raw material for research. That can actually be quite general. It can vary quite a lot depending on whether you're in a physics department or a music department or a landscape and architecture department. So it's very difficult for us as a library service to define, well, these are the list of 17 file formats that might be included. It can be an awful lot of different things to different people. One of the most useful things about research data, if we're making it public, is for it to be citable. So we'll see in a moment, all of the research data we're making available has a DOI, a digital object identifier. It can be cited. It has that persistent unique identifier to go back to. And most importantly, in the UK, this varies a little bit around the world. In the UK, most of our research funders now have a requirement to make some or all of the research data that they fund available. So we can think about this sort of idealized research life cycle, starting out with maybe you have an idea, you start to plan how the project might look, you go through a process of doing the research, you publish the research, other researchers then come along and discover the research. It gets used in other research areas and produces impact. That important information then we preserve, it gets reused, and we start again. So within the library, we have a relatively new research services unit, which is led by my colleague Angela over there. So a lot of the services we provide around research data are in these areas of reuse and planning, helping people to find data that they can use, helping people to integrate that with their research workflow, helping people to plan how they're going to look after their data as they go through a project. And then on the other side of this life cycle, we tend not to get too involved in the active research at the moment. But we have a system called ORDA, Online Research Data, which is powered by Figshare, which provides some of the support for publishing and discoverability and impact of research. And then the gap in this that we're filling with Rosetta at the moment is the preservation, of making sure that that research which we're making available to other people is going to be around for a long time. So we now have our University Research Data Hub available and online. If you're interested, it's at orda.shef.ac.uk. That is a local front end that we've built on top of the wonderful Figshare API. And that is a shop window to the data produced by the University of Sheffield. But what do we actually put in there? What does this data look like? So this is an example of a typical data set. There's some stuff in there. What is a WHL file? I don't know. I'm guessing it's a white hole. We've got a .dat file. What's in that .dat file? Goodness knows. We've got a zip file. There's probably all sorts of other stuff inside there, presumably related to relative time dilation. We're not sure. A lot of the data sets that we receive tend to look a little bit like this. Some of the file formats are familiar, some of them are unfamiliar, some of them it's impossible to guess without sort of opening up and peeling them apart to work out what kind of data there is in there. And in fact, we did a little bit of preliminary investigation a few months ago based on what had already been uploaded to ORDA on trying to identify the file formats we had in there. We pulled everything that we had in there out because it was a relatively small volume at the time. We run it all through Droid, and we found that a little over 20% we were able to identify what those files were, and the rest, Droid went, Those tend to be very discipline-specific file formats. In some cases, they're file formats that are produced by commercial bits of apparatus, microscopes, various different kinds of kit that our researchers used. In a lot of cases, they may even be recording this information in files on their own, to their own specification. So we've got quite a lot of work to do there. But to talk to you a bit more on a technical level now about how we're approaching this problem with Figshare and with Ex Libris, I'm going to hand you over to Angus.
Hi. So we're starting to receive files into ORDA or Figshare, however you like to call it. And effectively, the dream was to get this data that we're getting into ORDA into Rosetta in some way. So we started off with an idea that we could get all of the content in ORDA into Figshare and it would be glorious. DOIs have an interesting property that they are versionable. So as a researcher works on their data, if they've got a data set for the footfall in the city of Sheffield, then they've got the 2013 data set. 2014 comes along and they want to publish that data set. So DOIs have a versionable property that means that you can have multiple versions of the same data set. So we want to pull in all of those as well, because it's no use having the initial one but from 2000 when they started recording it, when there's an extra 17 years of footfall after that. So we thought we would use OAI PMH to harvest this as Rosetta has OAI. Equally, Figshare does. But that sort of presents some issues, so we'll take the latest data set. And we can always guarantee that we'll get the latest data set from Figshare. Equally, wanting to take the path of least resistance, using Rosetta's HTTP harvesting, then we'll pull off our files from Figshare via HTTP, and we're utilizing existing products. It should be reasonably simple. That's going to cause some issues because Figshare doesn't allow private data sets to be accessible. So we can't collect those. We'll sort of changed our goals a little bit, so we'll take public data sets and ones that are not just metadata records, one that's actually have data. We have discovered that we can use an XSL transform to drop those, and we're all good. And equally, we will work with Figshare to make sure that that information is available in the OAI harvest. So Figshare have produced a METS profile for OAI, which has all the relevant information, and we're all good. Next is sort of, it'd be actually quite nice to be able to tell our users that this is the case and that we are doing this. So we've worked with Figshare to get a notification flag on Figshare to say, hey, your data is preserved. And that references what Adi was talking about earlier, saying that there is now an API endpoint in Figshare so that Rosetta can talk to ORDA or Figshare and say, hey, we're preserved, here's your Rosetta PID, you're good to go, and we can communicate back to the researchers that this is grand. So, and Figshare have been implementing this at their end, so that's available in Figshare. I'm not sure it's available publicly, but should be shortly. So in terms of a flow, what happens? The researcher deposits their research data in ORDA. Rosetta goes and picks it up over AI using the METS profile. We transform Figshare METS into Rosetta METS, dropping the bits that we need. Rosetta goes and gets the files. Rosetta pushes the thing back to ORDA to say, hey, we've got this. And then Rosetta's able to preserve those preservation actions on the files that we've picked up, and the researcher manages to get a nice little flag in the corner of the data to say, hey, this is reserved, we've got it in the library, don't worry about it. So that's where we are now and what's happening. So today, we are in the process of testing this integration. It's not 100% complete, but we're getting there. Equally, the API callbacks will be available in 5.4 Rosetta, as you mentioned earlier, and we'll be testing those shortly. There is the ORDA launch, which launches at the end of this month, sort of the official hey-ho. And shortly after that, we should be launching the integration between Rosetta and Figshare into sort of the public domain, which will be grand. So where does that leave us tomorrow? So once we've finished this, then that has an issue, or the outstanding issues, shall we say, are around the ingest of embargoed content. So where research is not available to be published openly, it is not unusual to have this, and it's not something that we can collect into ORDA, into Rosetta. So we have an open question, shall we say, as to how we're going to collect this data and preserve it. Equally, the big outstanding issue is around file format identification. So as Jez mentioned earlier, the 79% of files that Rory didn't identify are open to interpretation. If we want to take preservation actions on those, well, yeah. If they're written to the researcher's specifications, then we've got a lot of work to do. Equally, I think there's a lot of work in guidance in terms of working with researchers, and this is an ongoing position, shall we say. There's a lot of thought going into working out how we can actually make this preservable. Research is typically quite cutting edge, shall we say, as it's research. And so there's often not many standards involved at this sort of stage of production. So we're trying to work out how we're going to make this work. Oh, that's the wrong direction. So, questions?
I was wondering if you had any surveys checking whether the preservation flag, or knowing that research data is preserved, serves as some sort of incentive to researchers to deposit their data in the repository.
Just you.
We've talked about it informally with researchers. I certainly. So one of the questions that I get a lot is do we have to worry about keeping a copy of the stuff that we put into ORDA, or will you deal with all of that for us? So they tend not to be asking for kind of specific features like that. It's more a general, we want you to deal with all this preservation stuff. So this is one way that we'll be able to say we're handling that for you and make them a bit more relaxed and comfortable about using the system.
I think one of the sort of things that are getting bandied around is around the requirement from funders about making the data available. And we kind of know that the research cycle is a fortifying cycle. So the more those actions happen, the more it feeds into itself in the future. Funders are pushing for that data to be accessible for 10 years after the last access. And in terms of researchers, being able to offer that to them is quite an appeal, I think.
Question. What motivated you guys to create a separate discovery layer interface and not maybe harness it into Primo or ORDA? What was the logic behind this?
So Figshare is a great product that we like very much, but the kind of world-facing Figshare portal looks exactly the same whether it's for the University of Sheffield or Monash University or University of Loughborough or any of their other clients. So one of our main initial motivations was to have some more unique University of Sheffield shop window onto the research data that we had. In the end, what that actually has allowed us to do is start building a platform on which we can add more interesting functionality that we can't get from just the basic Figshare. So we now have a collection of conference proceedings, which is difficult to do in a sensible way just using Figshare as it comes out of the box. We also have a portal that shows cross-department research institutes within our institution. Because of the way people within Figshare are allocated to one single department, it's really difficult within Figshare itself to pull together people from a research institute such as Insignia, which cuts across several of our faculties. So it's been quite an interesting journey, and it's proving to be more and more useful. We're now starting to look at how we can incorporate live data visualization into it.
Maybe I did explain myself. In the past, we had silos of discovery, and we had a lot of different interfaces to different repositories. And one of the things that I think would have been interesting here is to find a way to use this and get to a place where the discovery on one hand will have the end outcome of the research, which is the articles, and next to it, very easy accessible, is the actual research data. So this is what, and it sounds that right now the research data has its own interface, and I assume that the publication itself is not available there, and you actually have to search somewhere else. I'm just curious, is that the case, and do you see in the future place to combine those two?
Yes, there's various ways of approaching that. On the University of Sheffield end, we have an institutional repository which we share with universities of Leeds and York called ROW, White Rose Research Online. We're currently investigating how we can link records in ROW through to data sets in ORDA and vice versa. Longer term, to be honest, we're encouraging our researchers to deposit their data at the point when they're publishing the paper as well. So all the data sets have a DOI, they can be cited. So you deposit your data, you get your DOI, you cite the DOI in the paper, and the link to the data set is right there in the paper. That's the ideal situation. In terms of other discovery interfaces, we're working with JISC on the UK-wide research data discovery service, so all of our data will be discoverable through that interface as well. And for our internal users, all of our data sets are also being surfaced through Primo.
Thanks, Jess. That was the point I was going to clarification that our Primo discovery service harvests the repository records, both for data and for publications.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.